It began on a small scale, a few bangs and knocks coming from the direction of the house next door. Heather thought it was odd when the neighbors arrived home a short time later. She mentioned it to them, but they had nothing noted as being amiss, so she attributed the noises to the plumbing rather than intruders, and something else had made the direction of the noises seem wrong. The sounds occurred again only a couple of days later. Then again on the next night, but longer and louder. The routine was repeated for 2 more nights. She tried to track down the source of the noise, but whatever room she was stood in, the direction of the sound was from elsewhere in the house. She was disconcerted, but not worried. Old plumbing loves to play games with the imagination of the residents, she assured herself. The next morning she opened the cupboard where all the tinned food was stored, and was startled to find the usual jumble of cans and labels had been replaced by an arrangement in groups by the color of the label or packaging. When her 15-year-old son, Stuart, came into the kitchen to get his breakfast, she asked if he had rearranged the tins and packets. He shook his head, but Heather noted that he seemed oddly unsurprised by the question. That evening there were only 2 odd noises, but by now Heather gave them only a cursory couple of seconds thought. However, at about that time she was making pastry, and after turning to the fridge to pick up a bowl of minced beef to fill the pie that she was making, she was shocked to see the words "I want" written in the flour left on her rolling board. Heather paused to think. She could hear a gentle buzz from whatever console game Stuart was playing in another room. There was no possibility that he could have sneaked into the kitchen, written on the table, and silently fled in the 2 seconds that her back was turned. But who else could have done it? Then she smiled knowingly. He had marked the words in grease ahead of her using the board, as a practical joke. Heather reached to gently wipe the words, but before her fingers made contact, they wiped themselves. She gasped and took 2 steps backwards. After staring at the location for several seconds, she again reached for the flour. She brushed the flour tentatively, feeling no hint of any unexpected substances on the rolling board. A thought flashed through her mind, but she instantly dismissed it as ridiculous. Then she had it again, and assessed it as implausible. The next night was incident-free, although with Stuart out at the cinema, Heather felt a change of atmosphere about the house that she had never noticed before. Nothing was actually threatening about it, but it just did not feel right. She was quite relieved when her husband, working in the Middle East, rang for a chat. That break proved to be temporary, as when Heather and Stuart sat down for dinner during the following evening, they had only had a couple of mouthfuls each when they heard a couple of bangs from the kitchen, followed by a rasping voice quietly saying "I want" several times. They looked at each other puzzled, also slightly checking that other was not showing signs of knowing what was going on. Heather put her finger to her lips to indicate that they stay quiet. She gestured to Stuart to get up, and they edged slowly towards the kitchen, as near to silently as was possible. Stuart nudged the door open, and he took 2 very careful strides into the room, followed by Heather. There was nothing there, but now the quiet voice was coming from the direction of the dining room. Heather rushed back to the dining room and the voice stopped. "What was that?" "It wants what?" Stuart asked. "I don't know," Heather replied, but her nonsense thought from earlier returned. "But it is doing what people say that poltergeists do." "They don't exist," dismissed her son. "Well, do you think it was a noise from the plumbing that we both misheard as a voice?" "No," he answered. "From the little that I have read, most supposed cases can be explained, but there are a small number of exceptions. We need to find the explanation. If, and I mean if, it is a poltergeist, what can we do?" Heather shook her head. "It seems to have gone for now. Perhaps it will not come back." As they had done nothing more than get it out of 2 rooms, she doubted that it would give up that easily. They stood, listening for any further voices, for a couple of minutes. Nothing was heard. Stuart broke the silence. "We can't just ignore it," Stuart insisted. Heather shrugged. I don't know what we can do, she sighed. Call a ghost hunter from the television? Stuart suggested optimistically. Absolutely not. Those programs are just a fraud. Are you suggesting, he WRYY suggested, that they are banging the table and screeching when there is nothing on camera? Yes, I absolutely am, his mother confirmed. And something is definitely going on here, so that sort of thing is not going to help us. As to what will, I'll think about it, and we'll see what happens tomorrow. But we must look into it rationally. That night Heather found it difficult to sleep as her brain churned over the little information she had again and again, searching for an appropriate response. She drifted off to sleep without an answer. Over breakfast in the following morning, Stuart unhelpfully revealed that sweeping the internet into the early hours of the morning had only turned up contradictory possibilities, none of which gave reliable advice on what their reaction should be. Maybe we should just humor it, Stuart suggested. What? Just give it what it wants. But, sighed Heather, we don't even know what it wants. From what I read, it will probably tell us soon. It seems to like evenings, so maybe later we will know more. Heather expected to be nervous when she was making dinner, but she surprised herself by being no worse than slightly edgy. Her emotion was more curious about what was happening than unnerved by it. She started to discuss that non-terror with Stuart, who signaled her to be quiet. He grabbed her arm and led her into the front garden. I feel the same as you, Mum, he whispered. Not frightened, just wanting to know exactly what is going on. Then why are you whispering? And why did you bring us outside? It has not been throwing things around and I did not want to give it ideas. So, whatever happens, we need to stay calm, Heather said, nodding. Yes. And rational. She was pleased to hear him use that word, as she had been regularly reminding herself to act that way, but she could not resist answering, we are trying to make friends with what may be a poltergeist. We might have gone beyond the rational border. She guided Stuart back indoors, where their mutual sense of anticipation prevented any idle chat. Nothing happened until she was putting their evening meal on the table. I want to, rasped the voice. They both looked up and Heather noticed that Stuart was smiling. She looked sternly at him, and he changed to a more sober demeanor. A short silence followed before the voice repeated itself. You want to what? Heather asked quietly. I want to talk. There was a pause, then it repeated itself, struggling to get out the final word. You are talking, Stuart told it. I want to. The table shook. Talk. The table shook again. There was one faint repetition of the word talk and the voice was gone. Heather and Stuart waited to see if it would return, before he broke the ice. It looks as if we have more waiting and seeing to do. Hope it's not a long sentence it is trying to form. Obviously you don't find it frightening. No, I don't, he replied, it sounds more frustrated than angry. How do you mean? It sounds as if it is struggling to communicate, and is frustrated at not being able to say all it wants. But it is not threatening. I see what you are getting at. The intrusion is sinister, but nothing it has done so far is intimidating. I wonder if it can see us, or just hear us. When it comes back, we can ask. Heather patted him on the back, as much for her own encouragement as Stuart's, but she was glad that he too did not get the feeling that the presence was evil. They did not need a priest. Perhaps it was just a case of not needing one yet, but she steeled herself around that word rationally, assuming a poltergeist could be dealt with in that way. When her husband called later in the evening, Heather decided to mention what was going on. She thought he could hear him stifle a laugh at the other end of the line, following which he questioned if she was certain that a poltergeist was the problem. She snapped back that of course she was not sure, but had yet to come up with any better idea. He suggested that her sister-in-law could come and stay for a couple of days, to see what she made of it. Heather agreed that it could do no harm, but neither might it solve anything. She considered herself a sensible, logical person, and her opinion of her sister-in-law was that Izzy was too inclined to believe anything with a flavor of New Age belief, and she was certainly not the person to relegate the poltergeist theory below something far more probable. Early the next morning, Heather received the phone call that she was dreading, from Izzy. "I hear that you have a phenomena," she gushed. "A phenomenon." "There is only one," corrected Heather quietly, in anticipation of being ignored. "That is so cool." Heather rolled her eyes, and after a few minutes rambling, Izzy promised to be with her that evening. Whilst she would not normally be entirely thrilled by the prospect, Stuart had said he would be out with friends, so she was glad for some form of company. Izzy arrived late afternoon as promised. Before Heather could get a word in, Izzy had kissed her and assured her that she was so excited about the presents, but, nervous that she would be, frightened too. Heather wondered whether being alone with a poltergeist might be the less irritating option. She did not have to worry, as the presents opted to mark the evening by not being present, and after a couple of glasses of wine each, Izzy was much easier to bear. Perhaps, Heather wondered, the entity was assessing Izzy itself. During the evening of the following day, the entity/phenomenon/poltergeist returned with renewed strength. "Jessie, before dinner. I want to talk to Lizzy." Heather noted that her sister-in-law was temporarily speechless, which was definitely something that the poltergeist could be thanked for. She hoped it could read her mind. Izzy eventually responded. "I am here. You can, talk to me. I want to talk to Lizzy." "To Lizzy. I don't know a Lizzy. I'm Izzy." The voice did not respond directly to her, but repeated several times that it wanted to speak to Lizzy before it faded away. "That was weird." Izzy frowned, then addressed Stuart. "Do you know a Lizzy?" Stuart slowly shook his head. "Can we get a Lizzy? There must be one at school." "Honestly, Aunt Izzy, I don't know any Elizabeths at school. And if I did, am I really going to say to them that they need to come round to my house because our poltergeist needs to speak to them?" There was a silence whilst Izzy churned this idea over in her head, which was broken by Heather. "I have an idea. Izzy, you remember when I was pregnant with Stuart, and you convinced me that it was going to be twins? A boy and a girl?" She watched Izzy trying to recollect that and nodded encouragingly at her. Izzy nodded back. "Well, for the brief period when I naively believed you, the name we chose for the girl was Eliza." "But that means Lizzy does not exist," Stuart interjected. "Not quite. When you were quite young I was pregnant again, but lost the baby." "I'm sorry, Mum. I never knew that." "That's okay, honey. You did not need to know. It was tough when it happened, but time really is a great healer. We have all moved on from it." Of course they could not just move on from there, and discussion of the Lizzy problem ceased for the time being. Stuart noticed a wistful expression on his mother's face, and she appreciated that both he and Izzy tried to turn the conversation onto happier topics. As she lay in bed that night, Heather came up with a possible solution. It might be a harebrained one, but it was all she had. She broached it over breakfast. "The voice wants Lizzy. We cannot provide her. What is the nearest thing to Lizzy?" She and Izzy simultaneously turned to face Stuart, who was busy eating and not paying total attention. "What?" he asked. "You are the closest to Lizzy. Maybe we can trick it into thinking you are Lizzy," Heather explained. I don't think so. I don't reckon that our poltergeist is an idiot. Honey. No. Please? No. They were interrupted by a sudden noise that hit a crescendo very quickly. Doors around the house were opening and crashing shut. Drawers in the kitchen opened and slammed shut. Pictures shook on the walls. Then noise very gradually abated, and the voice cut in abruptly. I want Lizzy. I want Lizzy. It had not lost the sore throat rasp that distinguished it, but it was more forceful than ever. The voice paused and the doors began to slam again. The tablecloth flew around the kitchen, chased by the contents of a box of tissues. Stuart. Heather began. Can I think about it? Sure. The doors stopped and the flying objects flopped onto the tabletop. The three waited to see if the voice would return. It did not. After a couple of hours' consideration, Stuart reluctantly agreed to go along with his mother's plan. Heather took his measurements and told him that he could come with her to get some clothes for the role, but he did not have to. Unsurprisingly, Stuart told her that he would rather she handled it. Izzy offered to go with her, but Heather declined the offer. She wanted a quick and efficient shopping trip, and with Izzy present the experience would likely become anything but that. Whilst Heather was shopping, the phenomenon returned with a vengeance, ripping open the drawers in Heather's bedroom and scattering the contents all around the room. When Heather returned and had events relayed to her, she felt like she was being plagued by a petulant and possessive toddler. Still, presenting Lizzy to it was not that far away. She guided Stuart and Izzy back to the table where the fruits of her shopping were still bagged. Heather plucked the contents out, one by one, and explained them to Stuart. Tights, black, 1 pair, so you must not ladder them when putting them on. You can shave your legs if you want, but you don't have enough yet for it to matter very much. Stuart nodded. Bra and knickers set, white. She could see Stuart was about to query it, but cut off any objection early with a whisper. We don't know how much the entity will recognize as constituting a girl, so you will need a bit of shape. It then occurred to her that whispering was pointless, as the poltergeist would surely pick up everything that was said. Headband, pink. Just something to keep your hair under control. Tiered dress, 1, with a cute flower print on a black background. She winked encouragingly and noticed Stuart was about to speak again. It was the only one in the charity that was definitely your size. You could have got me trousers and a top, Stuart suggested. Heather paused. That had never occurred to her. There was nothing in your size, she lied mildly. And finally, Tada! Ballet flats, 1 pair in black. I thought shoes might be a problem, but the charity shop had these. Stuart again looked very dubious. Just be glad that the only pair of size 8s were not 4-inch heels, encouraged Izzy. Now be a darling and go into your room and put your bra and knickers on. Do up the bra hooks in front of your chest and spin it around when you are done. Stuart trudged into his room and stripped down. He put on the knickers quickly. The cut marked them out as women's wear, but they were mercifully plain, bar a little scalloping around all of the edges. He sat looking at the bra for a few minutes before he put it on, using the technique that Izzy had given him. Just as he finished, there was a call from his mother. Are you decent yet? Yes, I am. Heather immediately put her head around the ajar door. Stay sat down, it is tights next. She had already bunched them up for him and coached him through rolling then gently up his legs. The semi-opaques were quite durable and they were soon adorning his legs without being damaged. Izzy appeared with the dress and shoes. He slipped the latter on, and Izzy held the dress out to him. Be careful with this, she told him, The tears are a very delicate material, and you have to make sure that you get your arms through the straps on the lining. Izzy lifted the dress up and he slipped his arms in, finding the loops under the thin shoulder straps quite easily. She let go, and once the main part of the dress slipped down, she gave the hem a quick tug to ensure that it was hanging as intended. Stuart looked at himself in the mirror. The outer material was very thin, black with a flowery pattern of dark blue, purple and occasionally white. Without the lining, he noted, it would be fairly see-through. His mother fussed a bit with his medium-length hair and added the pink headband to hold her changes in place. Heather and Izzy appraised him critically. "Well, it all fits," Heather observed, "and the legs look good." "True," Izzy responded, "but he could do with, looking a bit more Lizzy than, sort of Stuart in girls' clothes." "I am Stuart in girls' clothes," he said sarcastically. "Just lift your dress up from the hem, please," Heather said. As he did so, she grabbed a pair of socks from one of his drawers and balled them up. With his hands being occupied and not able to defend himself, she reached under the tiers and popped a ball in each of the cups of his bra. On her command, he dropped the dress hem. "That's better," Izzy complimented, "a nice teenaged hint of a bust. But a bit of makeup would really do the job properly." "Do you mind?" Rather than answer, Stuart pouted. "Yes, keep your lips like that." Heather pounced with a tube of red lipstick and ordered him to hold still, and she quickly had him sporting a pair of scarlet lips. Any second thoughts that Stuart had were beyond application by now, and when his mother suggested a little work on his eyes, he did not have the will to say no. Heather originally was only going to apply some mascara to spruce up his eyelashes, but with no resistance she could not resist popping on a little eyeliner too. She also used a barrette and a couple of hair clips to ensure that his hair stayed in place. "I do have one more favor to ask," Heather added. Stuart sighed deeply. "Can we do your nails as well?" "This color?" gushed Izzy, brandishing her violet-colored fingertips in his face. "Yeah, whatever." "Right, hands on the side unit, fingers spread." Stuart complied as she rummaged in her handbag for her nail polish. Izzy did his right hand and guided Stuart through doing the left. When he was finished, she complimented how well he had carried out the job, then told him to keep them spread until they had dried. Whilst he was doing so, his mother approached with a slightly embarrassed smile on her face. Stuart had already decided that they could not humiliate him any worse, however nice about it they were being. Heather dangled a delicate silver chain in front of his face, with a small crucifix attached. "Do you mind?" "I doubt it makes any difference, and I also doubt that we have an evil entity here, but, just in case." "Sure," Stuart replied with a lump in his throat. Heather stepped behind him and hung the chain around his neck, attaching the clasp herself. Stuart glanced down and saw the crucifix glistening on his small bust. "That looks very cute, well done," smiled Izzy. He looked at himself in the mirror. He certainly looked girlish enough to fool someone with very low standards, so he hoped that the poltergeist was in that group. "What do you think?" Izzy asked. "I could have had clothes that are less girly," Stuart told her. "Maybe, but that might not have been enough for the poltergeist." "You actually look lovely," Heather added. "Now, what do we do?" "Wait?" "Just talk, but keep calling him Lizzy," suggested Izzy. They talked. After half an hour of idle chatter, the first rattles and raps on the furniture began. Within minutes, the voice piped up. "I want to talk to Lizzy." Stuart stood up. "I'm here." "Lizzy is here?" "I am." "Lizzy." To Heather's mind, there was, for the first time, a slight tone of joy in the rasp. There was a short burst of very loud knocking, the sound of wood on wood. From the scatter of clothes that had not been tidied up from the afternoon visit, a movement caught the eye of all three of them. It was a red cashmere scarf that Heather owned. It was moving like a caterpillar, arching itself from the back and pushing the front forwards. The motion was quite captivating, and the three of them watched. As they did, a thin gray mist gathered in the corner of the room. Initially oval-shaped, it settled into something more pear-like. It shimmered as if caught by a breeze, but the room was totally still. The occasional calls for Lizzy came from the direction of the mist. With Stuart's attention held by the mist, he had ignored the scarf until he felt something touch his foot. The scarf had reached him and was slowly rising up his lower leg, spiraling around the limb. The touch of the soft wool was very gentle, and Stuart suffered a mixed reaction, with the gentle brush of cashmere against nylon being a very pleasant sensation, but fear of what the scarf may do holding him in a tighter grip. He cringed very visibly. Heather noticed him doing so, seeing him point his palms towards the ground, bringing his wrists in to touch his thighs, with fingers pointed out. With his knees bending slightly as he did so, Heather could not help but think how girlishly he had reacted. "Lizzy. Do not be frightened," the voice appealed. "I can't help it," Stuart answered softly. "I don't understand you." He could feel that the scarf had circled his leg up as high as the hem of his dress, then stopped. "Do not be frightened," it repeated. I will try." I had to know that Lizzy was safe. Was safe. Safe from what? Safe from everything bad. Stuart felt something against his left buttock and glanced down to see a leather glove patting him there, very gently and slowly. "You're not bad?" Stuart teased. No. 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 I am good." "That is nice to hear." "What about Stuart? Do you have to keep him safe?" As soon as he spoke, Stuart worried that he may have given the game away, and the answer slightly surprised him. "Stuart is always fine." "Oh, really? That is nice to know." "What is your name?" he asked. The voice did not answer immediately. "I do not remember." "Try." "Do not remember." Heck. The voice was struggling, but to Stuart it sounded as if it was suffering from hiccups. He smirked, but stifled a laugh for fear of upsetting it. As he did so, the conversation was interrupted. "What color are you?" asked Heather cautiously. "I am brown." "And white," the voice answered. "Is your name Hector?" "Yes. Yes. My name is Hector," it eagerly agreed. "Hector, Lizzy is safe. You can rest in peace," she sniffed. Stuart looked around to see tears creeping down his mother's cheeks. "Thank you," the voice answered. "Thank you. Thank you." And then it was silent, the only sound being the glove falling to the floor and the scarf slithering down Stuart's leg, devoid of any control. None of them spoke for a few moments, then Izzy broke the silence. "Who is Hector?" she inquired. Heather smiled, still a little weepy. "He was my old dog. He died just before I got married. He was very protective, and I guess he just could not let go completely." She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, but smiled as she did so. After a few moments' contemplation she continued. "Come on, Stuart. Let's get you changed again." "There's no rush," he answered shyly. "Hector might be watching still. We don't want to upset him. Fancy a cup of tea?" They made their way to the kitchen. As he sat down at the table, Heather noted that, without any prompting, Stuart smoothed the skirt of his dress under him. Perhaps Hector was right, she wondered, and there was more of the elusive Lizzy in Stuart than she had ever known. She smiled to herself and ran her mind over a wish. Dear God, don't let Izzy ever work that out. She will say she was right about the twins, and will be insufferable. And I mean that with all due appreciation to someone who came here to help. That evening, Heather had another phone call from her husband. He asked if they still had a poltergeist problem. The tone of the question was oozing cynicism. It is sorted out. I will email you the long story, but in summary, it was a dog all along.